Trump 2.0 and Korea, next on the impossible state.
North Korea is the impossible state. It's a place that stumped leaders and policymakers for more than 3 decades. It has a complex history, and it has become the United States' top national security priority. Each week on this show, we'll talk with the people who know the most about North Korea.
Welcome everyone to the Impossible State, first episode of Impossible State in 2025. My name is Ellen Kim, Senior Fellow of the CSIS Korea Chair and host of the show today, sitting in for Dr. Victor Cha. Today we're going to discuss North Korea under the second Trump administration. I'm very glad to sit down with Sydney Seiler, who is no stranger to the show. Sydney Seiler is a well-known top expert on Korea. He has worked for the U.S. government and held numerous positions, including National Security Council at White House, National Intelligence Council, Office of Director of National Intelligence and Central Intelligence Agency, and National Security Agency. Currently, he's a senior advisor with the Korea Chair at CSIS. Welcome back to the show, Sid.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to today.
So with the President Donald Trump's inauguration held yesterday, there are a lot of things we can discuss today. But I want to start with you about President Donald Trump's remark from yesterday. He called North Korea a nuclear power. And his defense secretary nominee, Pete Hegseth, also called North Korea as a nuclear power in his written response to the Senate hearings a few weeks ago. So it doesn't seem coincidental that both the commander-in-chief and defense secretary nominee say the same thing. So what do you make of it? What does it tell us?
Well, I think it tells us that, President Trump and his national security team have looked at the North Korea threat, what has evolved over the last 4 years while he was out of office, and, face the reality that North Korea continues to grow its arsenal qualitatively and quantitatively. The threat that we face today is greater than the threat was 4 years ago. So it's a degree of just simply a realistic view of the threat. At the same time, I don't know that it means very much or gives too much insight into how the administration will deal with North Korea. I know the president has hinted that he believes Kim Jong-un would be happy that he's back in office, that he's prepared to engage in dialogue with adversaries around the world, and North Korea would be one of them. That leaves open the possibility for talks. Unfortunately, the road forward is in large part right now in Kim Jong-un's hands. He has refused to talk to the United States really since 2019, his failure to lock in his nuclear status at Hanoi, subsequent meeting with the president in Panmunjom later that year, and of course the working level meeting at Stockholm, which was the last contact. Since then, Kim Jong-un has been adamant in refusing to talk to the United States. So it's hard to predict at this time how that might change.
So, as just following up on what you just said, many people actually expect that summit diplomacy might resume under the second Trump administration. And however, as you just said, if you recall, in late December, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un said that he would adopt the toughest anti-U.S. counteractions. Do you think, is that just a rhetoric or is it something else?
So that's a great question. Again, to kind of do a little bit of review, right? After the Hanoi failure and the lack of any progress during the remainder of the Trump administration, North Korea kind of laid out a framework in a major party meeting towards the end of 2019, proclaimed on January 1st, 2020, that basically said we are no longer interested in talking to the outside. We don't need sanctions relief. Through perseverance, through endurance, through austerity, we will overcome this isolation and we will prevail as a nuclear power. And in subsequent amplifying language up to and including the declaration at the beginning of last year that no longer would North Korea seek any dialogue with the Republic of Korea, South Korea. Kim Jong-un has laid the ideological foundation for talking neither to the United States or the Republic of Korea. That said, Donald Trump's return to office provides an opportunity for Kim to review that position. And certainly the current domestic political developments in South Korea probably have led Kim Jong-un to reconsider perhaps, his reluctance to talk with South Korea. So going forward, I think we should assume continuity, at least for maybe the first half year, 12 months. If you watched the inauguration yesterday, President Trump has a pretty ambitious agenda with a lot of issues, domestic and foreign. And I just don't know that, with Kim Jong-un refusing to come to the table, how much effort President Trump could invest in North Korea and expect any type of meaningful return.
So it seems like he will probably, given a lot of things that President Trump would like to do domestically, I guess that his foreign international agenda would be probably, maybe Ukraine war, and then Gaza, Israel, and then probably North Korea next, probably, right? Is that correct?
Well, possibly, although, for the president, obviously China is a high priority.
Yes.
Both in terms of its economic challenges as well as the growing threat that China poses throughout the Indo-Pacific to the global order itself. And so the good news is, even if we put North Korea below Russia, Ukraine, Middle East, and China, North Korea is directly involved, as you know, in the Ukraine issue and Russia's aggression there. So the issue of North Korea troops supporting the war effort will doubtlessly be part of the president's efforts to try to find a resolution to that conflict. And certainly you can't talk too much about conflict in China, potential cross-straits tension there over Taiwan without North Korea coming up in that conversation. So this issue is even if it looks like, because Kim Jong-un isn't talking and there's no dialogue underway, it looks like nothing's going on. Indeed, a lot is being done on the North Korea issue.
Let's turn our focus to South Korea a little bit. You already mentioned a little bit about that. Given the political vacuum in South Korea right now, how do you think this will impact North Korea's provocation behavior? So far, North Korea has launched one intermediate range ballistic missile and several short range ballistic missiles right before the inauguration day. But do you think that North Korea will likely ramp up the provocation just like it did in 2017? Or are we on a sort of a different path considering the existing tie between Kim and President Trump, and also very different security environment in various countries?
So, I'd like to personally myself separate provocations that are lethal and kinetic in nature, like the sinking of the Cheonan back in 2010, the shelling of Yeonpyeong-do, and other similar types of provocations that actually involve some type of escalation of tension, firing back and forth, and occasionally, unfortunately, human life sacrificed along the way, as opposed to missile launches, which are part of a research and development and deployment and employment strategy. We will see missiles launched for development purposes. We will see missiles launched as part of training. We may see a seventh nuclear test. It sends a stronger signal. And while all those are described as provocations, they're all asserted by North Korea as their legitimate right to launch and test missiles like everybody else does. So the question is, I think, the more important one is, will Kim follow through on his threats made early in last year, in 2024, that said they would re-examine the boundaries and enforce what should be the righteous boundaries, and with a reference to the Northern Limit Line, that line on the West Coast that serves to kind of separate the forces out there, a line that was drawn by the UN command and the Republic of Korea, not recognized rhetorically by North Korea, but in generally abided by. And if they were to try to reestablish some type of maritime boundary and use force to enforce it, it would put South Korea in the position of having to either accept the newly Pyongyang-defined boundary and essentially admit diplomatic defeat, or use force to try to restore the northern limit line. And that might drive up tensions. That might, at a time of political uncertainty in South Korea and uncertainty that somewhat goes into the US-ROK alliance, it would be an ideal type of lethal kinetic provocation for North Korea to engage in, to try to sow more dissent and debate in South Korea about North Korea policy. So that is definitely something I think I'd be looking at in the future weeks and months as North Korea seeks to maybe exploit the current domestic political difficulties that Seoul is encountering right now.
You know, there is a concern in South Korea that South Korea might be isolated once the some sort of dialogue starts happening between the U.S. and North Korea. And I think that yesterday, what do you think about that?
So we settled on this term Korea passing. We used to use Tongmi Bongnam all the time, right? Talking to the U.S. while sealing off South Korea. And, part of the problem is even when you have the best intentions between Washington and Seoul, there's not going to be what I would call absolute simultaneous transparency in what is going on, but that indeed, both sides need to be committed to ensuring that this Korea passing doesn't take place. I personally was involved both in the secret diplomacy that we engaged in early 2011, and then later on the open diplomacy that led to the Leap Day understanding. And if you recall, back in 2011, we were still recovering from the Cheongnam sinking and the Yeongpyeongdo shelling. The U.S. was very sensitive to ROK political needs at that time, but we were also committed to moving forward with diplomacy. And before we would meet with the North Koreans, we'd sit down and share what was going on. And afterwards, we would debrief. And indeed, there was no real Korea passing, but there was always that impression of that. And part of that is more a frustration out of Seoul's inability to get Pyongyang really interested in their Korean dialogue. The fact that at the end of the day, North Korea just doesn't want a better relationship with South Korea. And sometimes when they do, it's only to get to the United States. So there's a frustration over that. But I don't think that that equates to the same as the U.S. ignoring South Korea's interest as it pursues North Korea. And I think that would be the same if there is progress on the U.S. DPRK front during the Trump administration. I think the Trump team will see value in keeping South Korea as a partner.
Yeah, sure. So if summit does take place down the road, what do you think Kim Jong-un might demand this time? And what's your opinion on the potential small deal that some people are speculating?
That's a great question. And the challenge I think that we face is, a misunderstanding of what transpired in Hanoi in terms of, whether North Korea came to the table with Kim Jong-un came to the table with an intent to negotiate fairly and sincerely, or whether we were going to get the same deal that, we have had for the past several years, limited facilities at Yongbyon in exchange for sanctions relief. The president rightly walked away from that, but while walking away from that at Hanoi, instructed, his team to continue to follow up. And indeed, it wasn't so much that Hanoi failed, but that North Korea over the subsequent months and now years has demonstrated it's not even interested in a small deal with the United States. But I would imagine that North Korea would be looking for, like in any negotiation, a minimalist approach, putting as little on the table to get as many benefits as possible. possible. That's not surprising. That's what everybody does in a negotiation. But it would be about sanctions relief, would be about alleviating pressure. And what they would probably put on the table is perhaps some limited symbolic moratoria, for example, on long-range missile launches or nuclear testing. And I think that deal will be as unappealing today as it was 5-6 years ago. And so this will be the real challenge. Not only that, from North Korea's perspective, in their relationship with Russia, they have secured a way around sanctions. They have secured by sending 10,000 plus troops to help Russia in their conflict with Ukraine, the ban on workers. And so there's the possibility for additional soldiers to be sent or workers to be sent to help in the reconstruction or in other Far East, Russia Far East projects. That possibility is there. So North Korea, the urgency of sanctions relief is not so great now because of the development of relations with Russia. The security guarantees that, they otherwise might seek from the United States, they've got a strategic partnership with Russia. So there's much less incentive today for Kim Jong-un to put any part of his program on the table, given his improving relations with Russia and the things that he is able to secure from Vladimir Putin that I'm certain, Donald Trump would not be, eagerly looking to put on the table.
I see. I want to hear your thoughts on China, specifically Beijing's priority concerning the, Korean Peninsula right now. Former U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken said, quote, Putin might be close to reversing a decade-long policy by Russia and accepting DPRK's nuclear weapons program. With that statement and Trump's remark yesterday, have you noticed any indication that China's core interests on the peninsula have changed or could change might change given the evolving security environment in general?
Yeah, I think their core interests remain a quiet Korean Peninsula where there's no conflict or uncertainty or tension that would otherwise lead to an increased demand signal for U.S. military presence in the region. I think China, for the past 7 decades, ever since, frankly, Kim Il-sung made the decision to invade in 1950, has had to deal with a North Korea that is unpredictable, that at times will lash out, and over which, at the end of the day, its leverage has been limited. At least the levers that China is willing to pull are small in numbers. We always talk about they could cut off food, they could cut off fuel, but they've never been willing to risk the destabilizing effects that those types of actions would have. And so their actual ability to execute leverage over North Korea has been limited throughout the Cold War. And so now we're in this newly emerging order, this post-Cold War order, and many of the dynamics remain the same. I think China right now has been a bit back-footed and surprised by Russia's approach to North Korea, which has kind of put Beijing a distant second in Kim Jong-un's attention. And it's also helping to embolden Kim. If Russia gives it technologies to improve its WMD program and conventional program, Kim Jong-un's options to engage in military actions targeting South Korea, even short of an all-out war for unification, increase. And this destabilizes the peninsula. I think these are types of conversations that Xi Jinping has been having with Vladimir Putin. It explains why we have this stand down, essentially, of PRC, DPRK diplomacy. And again, these things they shift tactically. If you look back over the decades, there are periods where the relationship grows close, and then when it grows distance. Right now, there's some distance in that relationship. I think all eyes have to be focused on the Trump team's engagement of China, because I think this will be one of the issues that will be on a long list of topics that will be discussed. Even I think I read speculation on President Trump making a trip to China to have a summit with Xi Jinping. So North Korea is going to be on the top of that, and so. that should give more insight into how China sees the North Korea issue right now, how it sees the Trump team's intent to handle that issue. 2017 was a highlight of our cooperation with China on North Korea.
Yeah.
And the major driver of that, of course, was not anything, either, Donald Trump was doing or his predecessor, Barack Obama, or what Xi Jinping was doing. It was what Pyongyang was doing, right? And so when tensions increase on the peninsula, China is more inclined to cooperate. When they're manageable, there's no real, it's not in China's interest to work with the United States on North Korea. And that's why this issue has, over the years, gotten so bad, is because it's been largely, handled by Beijing in this way. So I think all eyes need to be on the nature of the China-U.S. relationship under Donald Trump to see what type of working kind of relationship he is able to build with Xi Jinping. And that might give maybe some hope for a new approaches on North Korea that haven't been tried in the past.
That's very interesting. If somehow U.S.-China relations, intensifies, that could provide an opening for North Korea to draw China closer as well. But at the same time, China has this growing relationship with Russia. And I think that one thing I'm very curious about is how China sees this ongoing military, transfer, advanced technology transfer from Russia to North Korea. Do you think that Putin and Xi has some sort of conversation about that? Or is it something that Russia is unwilling to cooperate with China on that front, even though there is an industrial defense? China is providing a defense industry support to Russia for its war in Ukraine.
Right. I mean, we think back to 2022, before Russia's military actions against Ukraine, there was talk about this growing axis of upheaval, axis of authoritarianism, these challenges to the international order, largely driven by Moscow and Beijing. And we saw partners, and we always included Iran and North Korea in that list. In his Foreign Affairs article, former Secretary of State Blinken made it clear that, well, we're troubled by these revisionist countries and their cooperation. He was hesitant to use the word axis because it wasn't so clear that there was a body, or that these countries acted multilaterally per se. We see a lot of cooperation between these revisionist states bilaterally, but the idea that now there was going to be some more institutionalized formal order challenging the U.S.-led liberal order wasn't so certain. It remains uncertain, and I think it more concretely translates into the question, will Russia's cooperation with North Korea continue after some type of hostilities and some type of halt to hostilities has been achieved in Ukraine? Or does Russia still have these ambitions for being the leader of this new order that's challenging, the United States? I believe Xi Jinping's desire to achieve that type of leading role in the international community remains. He may have been a bit disturbed, quite frankly, at Putin's actions in a way that kind of stigmatized this new alternative order in ways that probably Xi Jinping did not want to do at that point in time. But Vladimir Putin moved. Xi had to adjust to accept it, and North Korea embraced it. So there's a lot of uncertainty now as we have a new president in the United States. There's talk about resolving the Ukraine crisis. There's talk about the president engaging China. So all those dynamics may shift, and it's still too early, 24 hours into the new Trump team, to fully assess how that might break. I think that will be one area that a lot of people, not only North Korea experts, but people looking at this new geostrategic order will be discussing in the days and weeks ahead.
So let's move on to Ukraine war. There have been a lot of reports coming out about the North Korean soldiers participating in the war, and I would like to hear your assessment about them. What have you observed so far and about them, and what would be the implication of this North Korean troop deployment for Korea in the future?
Yeah, this is an area where it really takes a lot of caution because there's so much disinformation out there, and there's so many motives behind a lot of the reporting. It's really hard to sift out the nuggets of truth and then try to ignore the speculative information. What do we know? That troops were sent in. The numbers, I think there's an agreement on 10 to 12,000. Rumors it may be upwards of 100,000. The question of whether Putin asked for them first or Kim Jong-un offered them first, I think that's an important question because it gets to the motive. And I'm inclined to believe that this might be something that the Kim Jong-un teed up for Putin. But I wouldn't be surprised either way. It's not that important, but it does show. It may indicate what Kim was seeking to achieve through this, and then also because of that, then you can scope how big this might grow going forward. If the goal was to demonstrate North Korea's willingness to shed blood for an ideological political partner, then that's accomplished with already, frankly. And we know the casualty numbers. They range, they vary. The idea that, within a couple of months, all 10,000 or so would be dead is not surprising given what we know about the casualty rates the Russians have been encountering. That these would still be within a manageable number for Kim to manage at home. I know there's speculation that, once the families learn where they're going and what they're dying for, this is going to be a problem for Kim Jong-un. I don't know. This is a guy who's got some incredible propaganda agitation apparatus behind him and who can sell the value to North Korea of helping a fraternal brother in need. So, the troops are there. They're not making a difference. Not many people thought they would. For the type of actions, every military action needs people pushing buttons to launch missiles, people standing guard to be on the lookout for an enemy. Not very sophisticated task, I think, that they were assigned to. So, the question of how much will this improve the Korean People's Army's readiness now that they have war experience, I think there'll be some. I think it's important not to overemphasize that. But going forward, I think the symbolism now has been achieved, and we should see whether, well, first of all, how the negotiations between Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump go, and to try to bring an end to these hostilities, and what piece the North Korea participation has in that, whether part of that is getting the North out of there, and whether Putin is ready to essentially throw North Korea under the bus, use them and lose them. These are areas that are uncertain going forward, but they're fighting, they're not making much of a difference, and it's a sad tragedy both for the Ukrainians that are dying in the process, as well as the North Koreans called to go to a land they know nothing about, language they cannot speak, and dying for a cause that isn't theirs.
Yeah. I mean, I totally agree with you on that. But speaking of, Kim Jong-un might have teed up this troop deployment to Putin. When you think about it, even though these are trained soldiers who are loyal to the regime, Kim Jong-un might have thought, they're essentially, these soldiers are exposure to the outside world. And I was wondering whether that would be considered as a risk for Kim Jong-un to take. What do you think about that?
It's kind of interesting. It's somewhat related to the idea of Russian tourists coming into North Korea. Because if you look at COVID and the post-COVID environment, in particular, Kim's concerns that expectations for improved U.S. DPRK relations before Hanoi were were dangerous or threatening to the regime at a certain level. And certainly that South Korean culture and any improvement of relations with South Korea would also be a potential risk to the regime. We've seen over the past few years a recalibration of how much liberalization is tolerable. Liberalization, including everything from, having cell phones to having market activity, being able to use foreign currency, all those things that over the years were either a relief mechanism to the economic hardships the North had, or were just simply the natural evolution of IT technologies providing exposure to South Korean culture, for example. And so we can see that Kim has been worried about this. This is perceived as a threat to the Kim family rule going forward. Similarly, there's a degree of risk when you send soldiers over to Russia. I think Russia isn't South Korea. There's no R-pop or R-dramas to go watch, and there's no other, I think, attractiveness to to these soldiers that they would go over there and see something that would kind of undermine their view of their home country or what have you. So I think it was seen as by Kim as manageable. And so the experience of war, the experience of going overseas, working with the Russians, did not appear to be that unmanageable a risk for Kim when he made the decision.
I see. So I have a final question. Since you remember the publication of the ODNI's National Intelligence Estimate in 2023, you actually had our event here at CSIS. Do you think that anything has changed since then regarding North Korea's intentions? I ask this because this current environment has dramatically changed. North Korea is getting support from Russia, that could have emboldened North Korean leader to take more assertive and aggressive actions. And a year ago, Kim Jong-un actually renounced the country's decade-long policy of unification with South Korea and calling South Korea the enemy. So some people might wonder if that would be some kind of indication of North Korea's revisionist ambitions.
Those are very legitimate concerns, and if you look at the National Intelligence Estimate in what we released, in addition to the key judgments on whether North Korea would primarily use nuclear weapons for defensive purposes, coercive, or offensive purposes, is a chart that looks at the drivers.
It was very helpful.
Yeah, and those drivers, I mean, they're striking today in terms of what they said about Kim's growing confidence in his, first of all, that coercive or revisionist actions yield political benefits. This has been, it's been both the provocation calculus and the focus of U.S. Policy for many years. I remember early on in the Obama administration, one of the key objectives of the Obama team's policy was to de-incentivize provocations, to not reward North Korea for bad behavior. The idea that there's a confidence that such behavior might pay off and that China and Russia would have its back, both in terms of either being willing to provide cover to any overzealous South Korean response to North Korea actions, or simply being there as a lifeline of support, so that coercive or revisionist behavior did not result in additional pressures and sanctions. And indeed, it would only encourage Beijing and Moscow to urge the international community to take a softer approach, to listen to North Korea's legitimate security concerns, to relieve and alleviate the pressure and sanctions, et cetera. And so I think now, if Kim's looked at China's and Russia's sanctions enforcement since 2017, he needs to be encouraged that at the end of the day, neither Russia or China would act as obstacles to him carrying out those types of actions. And then finally, Kim's confidence in his conventional forces, deterrence, theorists talk about this stability instability paradox, that as two countries kind of match each other in the nuclear domain, it provides one of the actors to be more adventuresome and be more risk-taking in the conventional realm. And this seems to be really a good model through which to look at North Korea, that now that it has these nuclear capabilities to deter over-the-top retaliations from South Korea or the United States, that it would feel more comfortable operating in the conventional realm. And perhaps the reason we haven't seen this until now not is so much because North Korea has been contained, but because Kim's conventional forces have been in a protracted period of neglect since really the Cold War, undertrained, underfed, underfueled, a million-man force where quantity has a quality all of its own, as we used to like to say. But now with assistance from Russia that we've been hearing discussed as the quid for the support that North Korea has been providing to Vladimir Putin, with these improvements across air defense systems, Navy, and even in ground, we would see a more credible conventional force, and then suddenly the options available to Kim Jong-un, expand. The motivation remains the same, to either galvanize loyalty and support for the regime at home, distract attention from internal hardships, inflict political punishment and embarrassment on the South Korean government and for its North Korea policy, drive a wedge in the US-ROK relationship, and ultimately, establish more firmly a dominant position on the peninsula where Pyongyang's needs and demands take priority over those of South Korea. A gradual process that they could move down this path from the mere coercive into the revisionist. So I think those concerns still need to be there, and a discussion needs to be had on how to deter them.
Yeah.
In particular, where we now have a situation in South Korea where the greatest accomplishments, I think, of during the last 4 years in deterring North Korea, the Washington Declaration, the Nuclear Consultative Group, Camp David, and what powerful message is sent to both China and North Korea through trilateral cooperation, our strategic asset deployments, our demonstrations to the people of the Republic of Korea of our commitment to their defense. There's now a debate on whether those actually led to destabilization and antagonized excessively North Korea, China, and Russia. So these are, questions going forward. What works, what doesn't, what causes tensions needlessly, what projects hopes for engagement without any justification. These are the types, I think, as we look at North Korea policy, particularly not only under the new Trump administration, but out of what South Korea leadership for the coming years. These are the types of conversations we need to continue to have.
And we're going to watch this over the coming years.
Right.
Yeah. So excellent. This is a very timely and I think insightful discussion. Thank you so much, Sid, for sharing your thoughts.
Thank you, Ellen.
To our listeners and viewers, thank you for tuning in. Today's Impossible State. We look forward to seeing you again in the future episode. See you soon.